September 16, 1944. The war in Western Europe appears to be nearing its breaking point. Allied armies are racing across France after the collapse of German defenses following Normandy. Entire Wehrmacht units are dissolving, some retreating east, others surrendering outright. But on this quiet stretch of the Loire Valley, something unprecedented is unfolding. Nearly 20,000 German soldiers, still armed, still organized, are marching not toward Berlin, but toward surrender. At their head is a German general who has made a decision no one in Hitler's command authorized. And waiting on the American side is a man famous for doing the opposite of mercy, General George S. Patton. What happens next will confuse Allied officers, anger politicians, inspire soldiers, and quietly accelerate the collapse of German resistance in France. This is the story of why Patton protected a German general after capturing him, and why it mattered more than most battlefield victories.
Botho Henning Ilster was not supposed to surrender. In September 1944, Hitler had issued direct orders. German units in France were to fight to the last man, retreat only eastward, and never capitulate to advancing Allied forces. Elster, a career officer and World War I veteran, commanded a fragmented force of nearly 20,000 men, administrative troops, rear echelon soldiers, wounded units, and scattered combat remnants trapped south of the Loire. Cut off from armor, air support, and meaningful supply lines, Elster understood the truth his superiors refused to face. Continued resistance would accomplish nothing except mass death. French resistance pressure was growing. American columns were closing fast. And unlike SS formations, Elster's command still believed in professional soldiering over ideological suicide. Quietly, without Berlin's approval, he began negotiating surrender. Not with any American general, but with the one most Germans feared, George S. Patton.
By 1944, George S. Patton, Jr. was infamous on both sides of the front. To American soldiers, he was brilliant, profane, and relentless. To the Germans, he was the Allied commander most associated with speed, aggression, and destruction. His Third Army had smashed across France in weeks, overrunning towns faster than German staff maps could be updated. Patton openly despised cowardice, incompetence, and hesitation. Yet beneath the hard language was a professional soldier who believed deeply in military tradition. Patton admired discipline, even in enemies. He read history obsessively, studied ancient warfare, and believed that wars were won not only by force, but by breaking the enemy's will to continue. When news reached Patton that a German general wished to surrender tens of thousands of troops intact, his reaction was not anger, but calculation. This was not sentimentality. This was strategy.
When Elster formally surrendered on September 16, 1944, many Allied officers expected a public humiliation. Instead, Patton ordered something unexpected. Elster was treated as a professional officer, not a criminal. He was allowed to keep his dignity, escorted properly, and shielded from abuse or spectacle. Patton refused press theatrics, no staged insults, no propaganda parade. To critics, this looked like softness, but Patton understood the signal it sent across German lines. If surrender meant survival and honor, more commanders would choose it, and they did. Word spread rapidly through collapsing Wehrmacht formations that surrendering to Patton did not mean disgrace, it meant life. Within weeks, German resistance in much of France evaporated faster than Allied planners expected. This was warfare by psychology, and it worked.
At Supreme Headquarters, news of Elster's surrender reached General Dwight D. Eisenhower within hours. Normally, such an event would trigger strict procedural oversight, but Eisenhower chose not to interfere. By September 1944, Allied command faced enormous logistical strain, overextended supply lines,
damaged ports, and fuel shortages threatening the advance into Germany. Processing nearly 20,000 prisoners without resistance was not a problem, it was a gift. Eisenhower understood Patton's instincts, even when he disagreed with his methods. This surrender removed an entire German force without costing a single American division weeks of combat. There were no civilian massacres, no reprisals, no partisan escalation. The surrender aligned perfectly with Eisenhower's broader strategy: maintain momentum, minimize casualties, and keep German formations collapsing rather than consolidating. In war, results mattered more than appearances, and Patton had delivered exactly that.
Inside the German army, Elster's surrender sent shockwaves. For years, Nazi propaganda had insisted that surrender meant humiliation, torture, or execution. But the reality contradicted the myth. German soldiers who heard about Elster's treatment learned that surrendering to American forces, especially Patton's, did not strip them of dignity. This mattered deeply to career officers who still clung to traditional military honor. As Allied forces approached the German border, more commanders began choosing pragmatism over fanaticism. Units dissolved rather than fought. Bridges were abandoned. Towns surrendered without resistance. This was not defiance, it was exhaustion mixed with calculation. Patton's decision did not win the war alone, but it accelerated an already unstable collapse. Psychological warfare had quietly outpaced artillery.
Patton was not interested in Nazi ideology. He despised political fanaticism and viewed the war through a strictly professional lens. To him, German generals like Elster were not enemies because of belief, but because of circumstance. Patton believed that soldiers who fought honorably deserved honorable treatment once defeated. This belief was rooted in his study of history, from Roman campaigns to Napoleonic warfare. Patton understood that humiliation hardened resistance, while respect often dissolved it. This approach did not make him lenient. He remained ruthless in combat. But once the fighting ended, Patton shifted immediately to order and discipline. His actions toward Elster reflected that code. It was not friendship, it was doctrine.
The surrender of Botho Henning-Elster remains one of the largest organized capitulations to U.S. forces in World War II, yet it is rarely discussed. There was no dramatic firefight, no cinematic last stand. Instead, it was a quiet moment where psychology outperformed violence. Patton's decision demonstrated that war is not only about destruction, it is about decisions made when destruction is no longer necessary. In late 1944, as the Third Reich collapsed under its own weight, choices like this saved lives on both sides. They also revealed a truth many overlook. Even in total war, professionalism could still shape outcomes. Patton understood that victory was not just defeating the enemy, it was convincing him the fight was already over.
Over time, stories surrounding Patton and Elster have accumulated exaggerations. Some claim secret alliances, others suggest political defiance. The historical record supports neither. Patton did not free Elster. He did not negotiate independently of Allied authority, and Elster was not spared captivity. He spent years as a prisoner of war. What Patton did was far simpler and far more effective. He ensured the surrender occurred without humiliation, violence, or spectacle. This distinction matters, because by preserving military protocol, Patton reinforced surrender as an acceptable outcome rather than a betrayal. The result was compliance, not resistance. In war, clarity prevents chaos, and Patton was always clearer than his critics allowed.
Some viewers believe Patton was later silenced for thinking too independently or for opposing Soviet expansion. These claims persist, fueled by Cold War suspicion and Patton's outspoken nature, but no credible historical evidence supports assassination.
Patton died in December 1945 from injuries sustained in a documented automobile accident in Germany. Investigations found no foul play. While Patton did express concerns about post-war Europe, he operated fully within Allied command. His disagreements were strategic, not rebellious. Separating documented fact from speculation honors history rather than distorting it. Patton's legacy does not require conspiracy to remain extraordinary.
By late 1944, the German army was fractured. Ideological loyalty had weakened. Supply lines were broken. Trust in Hitler's leadership was eroding rapidly. In this environment, professional respect became a lever. Officers like Elster were looking for exits that preserved their men's lives. Patton's approach offered one. This did not undermine Allied goals, it supported them. Each surrendered formation freed American divisions to advance faster, conserve resources, and avoid urban destruction. Respect was not kindness, it was efficiency. And in the calculus of war, efficiency saves lives.
Historians today view the Elster surrender as a case study in command judgment. Patton applied force where necessary and restraint where useful. His critics often focus on his temperament, but moments like this reveal calculation beneath the bravado. Patton understood when the battle was already won. Protecting Elster was not weakness, it was recognition of reality. The war would soon move into Germany itself, where resistance would harden again. Every unnecessary fight avoided in France mattered. This surrender did not make headlines, but it shortened the war in ways statistics cannot fully measure.
After the surrender, Botho Henning Elster disappeared from public view, not because he was protected from consequence, but because the process worked exactly as intended. Elster was transferred into Allied custody, interrogated, and eventually sent to a prisoner of war camp in the United States. He was treated under the Geneva Conventions, the same standards applied to thousands of German officers. There were no special privileges, no political favors. Elster remained a prisoner until 1947. When he returned to Germany, he lived quietly and never held military or political power again. His decision in 1944 did not make him a hero in Germany, but it spared thousands of lives. History records him not for loyalty to ideology, but for choosing an end when continuation served no purpose.
If respect worked so well, why didn't it end the war faster? Because not all German commanders were Elster. Fanatical units, particularly those tied closely to the Nazi Party or SS, continued fighting long after defeat was inevitable. In cities like Aachen and later Berlin, ideological commitment replaced military logic. Patton understood this distinction. His approach was never universal, it was selective. Where professionalism remained, he exploited it. Where fanaticism ruled, he crushed it. This adaptability was a strength, not a contradiction. War rewards commanders who can distinguish between enemies who can be persuaded and those who cannot.
Though rarely highlighted, the Elster surrender became a reference point in post-war military education. Western armies increasingly studied psychological leverage alongside firepower. The lesson was clear. Wars end faster when enemies are given an off-ramp. Patton never wrote doctrine on the subject, but his actions spoke clearly. Modern military planning incorporates similar principles, from negotiated withdrawals to surrender corridors. These ideas did not originate in 1944, but Patton demonstrated their effectiveness at scale. The surrender on the Loire was not just an end, it was a preview of how modern wars would increasingly conclude.
To understand Patton's decision is to understand the man himself. He was aggressive, theatrical, and uncompromising, but also deeply pragmatic. Protecting Elster aligned perfectly with Patton's belief that wars are won by breaking armies, not annihilating them. The surrender cost nothing and delivered everything. Thousands of prisoners, 0 American casualties, momentum preserved. Patton did not soften war, he shortened it. And in September 1944, as Allied forces pushed toward Germany's borders, time mattered more than symbolism. This was not mercy, it was mastery.
The surrender of General Elster did not come with a dramatic battlefield victory or a headline-grabbing explosion. It happened quietly, away from the front lines, at a moment when Allied forces were already advancing rapidly. History often remembers battles, not decisions that prevent them. Yet this surrender removed an entire German formation without resistance, casualties, or destruction. There were no ruins to photograph, no heroic last stands to dramatize. And because it looked uneventful, it was easy to overlook. But in strategic terms, it was precisely these moments, bloodless, controlled, decisive, that allowed the Allied advance to continue at speed toward Germany itself.
Patton is often remembered for his aggression, his speeches, and his relentless drive forward. But moments like this reveal another side, judgment. He understood when force was necessary and when it was redundant. He recognized surrender as a weapon when applied correctly. Protecting Elster was not about compassion, it was about control. By shaping the terms of defeat, Patton denied the enemy chaos, desperation, and martyrdom. This ability to dominate not only the battlefield but the outcome defined his command. It is why even critics acknowledge that Patton saw war as a system, not just a series of fights.
For American soldiers, the surrender reinforced a powerful message. The enemy was breaking. Entire German units were choosing survival over resistance. This knowledge mattered. It reduced fear, increased confidence, and confirmed that the war in Western Europe was turning decisively in the Allies' favor. Morale is not built only through victory. It is built through evidence that victory is inevitable. The Elster surrender provided that evidence. It showed that German command cohesion was collapsing from within. And for soldiers on the ground, that understanding made every mile forward feel lighter.
War is often described as the absence of morality, but moments like this complicate that idea. Patton did not excuse the enemy, he defeated him, but he also recognized that honor could be leveraged to end violence sooner rather than prolong it. This balance between ruthlessness and restraint is rare in commanders under pressure. The surrender of Elster did not change the outcome of the war, but it changed how that outcome was reached in one crucial sector. And in total war, reducing suffering without sacrificing victory is not weakness, it is command excellence. In September 1944, George S. Patton did not win a famous battle. He made a decision. By protecting a defeated enemy general, he accelerated the collapse of resistance, preserved Allied momentum, and saved lives on both sides. This moment reminds us that history is not shaped only by force, but by judgment. The war in Europe would continue for months, and harder fighting lay ahead. But here, on the Loire, victory was achieved without firing a shot. Sometimes, the most decisive weapon in war is knowing when the fight is already over.